Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this week's penultimate edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight, is there a new, deadlier Omicron variant that's even impossible to detect through the normal swab test? We speak to a panel of experts after the National Health Department today admitted there's a sub-variant they say is only of interest, but certainly not of concern. Campaigning is gaining momentum ahead of the governing party's December elective conference, with an unprecedented number of candidates being touted for each and every one of the ANC's top 6 positions. ANC Northern Cape leader Dr. Zamane Soul calls it, quote unquote, a real congestion. He then goes on to ask, is this a sign of qualitative growth towards a deliberative, democratic culture in the ANC? I get him to answer that very question, and many others. The Watchdog starts now. The message is creating panic on social media, so much so that the Department of Health this morning issued a response. Here's what the message says in part, that BA 2.75 is here because the new COVID Omicron variant coronavirus is different, deadly, and not so easy to detect correctly. The symptoms of the new COVID Omicron virus are as follows: no cough, no fever, there will only be joint pain, headache, pain in the neck, upper body back pain, pneumonia. Under normal circumstances, no appetite. Of course, the toxicity of the COVID Omicron is 5 times higher than that of the Delta variant. And the mortality rate is also higher than that of Delta. It takes less time for the disease to progress to extreme severity, and sometimes there are no obvious symptoms. Let us be more careful. The message, of course, goes on, but you do get the gist of it. Well, so what does the department think of it all? Dr. Joe Phaahla is the National Health Minister. He joins us on the line. Welcome, Minister. Thank you for your time. A statement you issued out, or your department issued this morning, says the Ministry of Health has noted the overstated message circulating on social media platforms. Is that your view? It is overstated?
Well, definitely it is, Vuyo, and to the SABC viewers and listeners. What we can say is that notwithstanding that we lifted all restrictions on the 22nd of June this year, we have continued to be very vigilant in terms of monitoring the development of the COVID-19 in all respects, in terms of from the laboratory side, the NICD's monitoring, and even though we don't report on a daily basis, they do report to us, they give us weekly reports. From our clinicians also do report in terms of what they see. The genomic surveillance network is also reporting on a regular basis. And on the basis of that, we can say that that sensational message, whose aim is probably to create a panic amongst the South Africans, it's really unfounded. The reference to the BA 2.75. It's one of the subvariants, one of the genomes which have been selected. I hope I'm still audible.
Yeah, you're still audible, Mr.
It's one of the subvariants which was identified by the Genomic Sequencing Network, but it's just one of them, and nothing really much in terms of, the kind of symptoms and, severity which is mentioned in that message. It's really unfounded, both from our from this network, from the laboratory reports, and also from the clinical reports. We know that since the advent of COVID, there has been different, changes in terms of the dominant clinical presentation from the different variants. But overall, even as the various variants from the Alpha, Beta, Delta, and the Omicron, there has been just some sort of basic presentations, clinical presentations, which would vary from individual to individual. The dominance of one, some maybe more fatigue, some, for instance, the Omicron, less of the lower respiratory tract in terms of pneumonia, more upper respiratory tract. But overall, the presentation has been essentially, broadly speaking, the same. So I want to confirm from that our statement that indeed that circulation of that statement of alarm is totally unfounded.
So let's go through, some of the points that this public notice, as whoever has been circulating it calls it. Are you saying, Minister, that the toxicity of this subvariant is not 5 times higher than that of the Delta variant, and the mortality rate is also not higher than that of Delta, as this statement claims?
Well, I don't even need to restate, as we know, and I see Prof. Madi is also on the platform. He can confirm that, from all the clinical and epidemiological reports, there is no pressure on our health services, primary health, hospitals, admissions, ICUs, with absolutely no pressure. And also just to say, from the genomic reports, the dominant circulating subvariant remains the BA.4 and the BA.5. This one is one of those which, in the reports which they give us, they indicate that since the advent, there's been over 40,000 subvariant and genomes of the COVID. So the B.2.75 is just one of those which has not even dominated as we speak. From the genomic surveillance, they still pick up the dominant being the BA.4 and .5. And from clinical presentations, as I said, we have no pressure none of our 9 provinces or districts or any of the health facilities have reported any significant change in terms of the disease pattern and admissions and such, on which this is the kind of data we rely on to say that something significant is happening.
Mm-hmm. Have we, or do you know, Minister, if we have had people who have been diagnosed with this subvariant, and if so, how well they are doing, or how different their situation is from anything we have seen or experienced before?
Well, the reason why we say that from our experts, it's classified as a subvariant of interest, but not really of significance, is because nothing different compared to the overall presentation of the Omicron variant, and in terms of its virulence, in terms of its speed of spreading and all that, nothing different. And the reports which we're getting, and remember also that because of the fact that just in terms of prevalence and presentation and testing is less, so even the samples, even in terms of sequencing, are far less. But what they say is that at the current moment, the dominant that particular subvariant never actually dominated, and it has not brought any different presentation. So I think we can lay that to rest.
Okay. You're saying in your statement that you're in daily contact with the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, but then you also go further to say the lifting of COVID-19 restrictions doesn't mean the pandemic is over. Hence, you encourage all unvaccinated and partly vaccinated people to vaccinate and also get booster shots at the nearest public health facility. This is because the department continues to record positive cases and deaths related to COVID-19 on a weekly basis, which confirms that we are not entirely out of the woods. The importance of that part of your statement, Minister.
Well, the importance of that is to say that the COVID-19 virus is still there. Just in terms of the last reporting week ending on the 10th of September, we got the report of confirmed positive cases was just over 1,300. So in terms of, there's still people presenting to their health facilities. There are still a few who get seriously ill as a result of that. But the numbers are quite significantly lower than where we were. If we look at, even if you take 2022, where we were at the beginning of the year, where there's a little bit of a spike of the smaller fifth wave, which we had around April going into May. So we've had the longest sustained level of, low levels of infections, of admissions to hospital and ICUs. So, but while that remains, the virus is still there. It's important that, because there are a number of other risk factors, as we know, in terms of diabetes being one of those, hypertension, cardiac disease, and, which there are people who are immunosuppressed who are at high risk. So the risk factors are still there. So, and it's important, therefore, that we encourage people to continue to protect themselves by presenting themselves for vaccination and also for booster shots.
Minister, let's leave it there for this evening. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to communicate to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the Minister of Health, Dr. Joe Phaahla, on the back, of course, of that statement that's doing the rounds in social media and which has created a great deal of panic, to the point that the Department of Health this morning issued a statement dismissing this particular communique as an overstated message that they say we shouldn't panic about, because the subvariant, the statement goes on to say, has not made any impact. Well, let's now see whether the experts actually agree with the government's position on this. Listening in to that conversation with the minister was Professor Shabir Madhi, who is the Dean and Professor of Vaccinology at the University of Witwatersrand. He was formerly, of course, a member of the Command Council and has been dealing with this issue from day one. Prof, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. I don't know what you make of this public notice, as the people who are circulating it are calling it. And I'm going to just, for the benefit of viewers who may have just joined, restate some of the things that are being said in this statement. It says that be sure to wear a mask. BA 2.75 is here. The new COVID Omicron variant is different, deadly, and not easy to detect correctly. I'm hoping we're going to put it up for the sake of our viewers so that they can go through some of the claims that are being made here as I am reading them. The symptoms of this virus are as follows. 1, no cough. 2, no fever. There will only be joint pain, headache, pain in the neck, upper body back pain, pneumonia. Under normal circumstances, no appetite. The toxicity of the COVID Omicron is 5 times higher than that of the Delta variant, and the mortality rate is also higher than that of Delta. It takes less time for the disease to progress to extreme severity, and sometimes there are no obvious symptoms. Let us be more careful. The virus strain will not be deposited in the nasopharynx area. It directly affects the lungs, that is the window in inverted commas, and the duration is relatively short. It goes on to also say the result of the nasal swab test for COVID Omicron is usually negative, and the number of false negative cases is increasing. This means the virus will spread in the community and directly infect the lungs, leading to viral pneumonia and then causing acute respiratory pressure. This explains why COVID Omicron has become highly harmful. The virus is virulent and the fatal rate is high. Your thoughts, Prof?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. So unfortunately, much of what you read out is really misinformation. The BA 2.75 sublineage of the Omicron variant, in fact, was first identified towards the end of July. You might or might not recall there was something called Centaurus, which we were speaking about sometime in early August. And that actually is a BA 2.75. It was labeled in the media as Centaurus. It first emerged in Asia and India, and it did gain some traction in that area. But essentially, it's not too different from Omicron. It might be a bit more infectious in that if a person is exposed to it, you're more likely to be infected. And in a laboratory, it does indicate that it might be more efficient in attaching to human cells. But that is in a laboratory. I think we need to understand that we're in a very different space when it comes to COVID-19 compared with where we were during the course when Delta variant circulated, as an example. In that a significant percentage of the population have now developed immunity, both from infection and some as well as from vaccines, and some a combination of the two. So 2 important issues. This is a sublineage of Omicron, which has been circulating for almost 2 months now. Certainly no evidence that it is more severe than Delta. In fact, if anything, it's less severe than Delta. But that's because people have developed protection immunity against severe illness from infection as well as past vaccination. And in addition to that, the mortality, the clinical spectrum, the type of presentation might differ from Delta, but the reason why the clinical presentation is differing now is got less to do with the virus, but more to do with the underlying immunity that has evolved over time. And that underlying immunity is changing the clinical presentation when people are becoming infected, in that, as you correctly pointed out, it might well be that people are less likely to develop a cough, less likely to develop fever, but the reason for that is our body is now equipped to be able to deal with these infections as they're coming along. Our body is not completely equipped to protect us from being infected, but our body is very well equipped now, in a majority of us, to actually prevent these infections progressing to severe illness.
Just to recap, Prof, because I mean the whole point of this conversation is, we're just playing our public service role on the back of everything that this so-called public notice says. So the fact that you may not experience, cough or fever shouldn't really worry you. It doesn't mean much, precisely because, as you have just said, our bodies are equipped to actually deal with most of what we have seen or that continues to come our way. Correct?
Absolutely. And like I said, the sublineage of the Omicron variant is not too different from Omicron itself. There's some differences which might make it a bit more able to infect a person, but we're no longer trying to prevent infections. Our primary focus, be it with vaccines or past infection, is to ensure that we have as few number of cases of severe illness. And we are doing very well when it comes to severe illness. As the Minister pointed out, there's been hardly any meaningful increase in hospitalization or death from COVID-19 in South Africa, despite there being a slight uptick in the number of cases that are being documented.
And of course, there's also no evidence, you're saying, that the toxicity of this particular subvariant is 5 times higher than that of the Delta variant, and the mortality rate is also higher than that of Delta.
Correct. So when we use the term toxicity, it might mean different things. In terms of infectivity, that is when a person is exposed to the variant, is a person more likely to become infected than with Delta? The answer to that is probably yes. But when a person is infected, is a person more likely to end up in hospital compared with when Delta was circulating? The answer to that is no. If a person is infected with this variant, is a person more likely to die compared to being infected with Delta? The answer to that is as well is no. And like I said, the reason for that is not just because of the virus being slightly different, but rather because of the extensive immunity. More than 90% of people in South Africa have developed immunity which protects them against progression from infection to severe disease. And that is from vaccines as well as from past infection.
And is there any evidence to support another claim that this statement makes, which is that the results of nasal swab tests are usually negative on this one?
Absolutely not. The type of testing that we do, the PCR testing, is equally sensitive to being able to detect this particular sublineage of the variant compared with how well it performed in detecting earlier variants, including the Delta variant. So people that are symptomatic, that come forward to be tested, if they are actually infected, they will be equally likely to be documented as being positive compared with what happened in the past.
And of course, as the Department of Health statement reminds us, something I put to the Minister as well, at the end of the day, the lifting of the COVID-19 restrictions doesn't mean that the pandemic is over. So people are being encouraged to vaccinate, get booster shots, and all those things.
So we're very much going into an endemic phase of this of COVID-19. In that, I do believe that we're very much past the acute phase of the pandemic. We will continue experiencing COVID-19 for the rest of our lifetimes. COVID-19 is not going to go away, and it's extremely unlikely, in my opinion, that we're going to get a variant that is able to sort of evade that arm of the immune system which protects us against severe disease. So we're sort of in an endemic phase almost already, and we just need to ensure that especially the high-risk individuals, people above the age of 60, 65, people with any sort of underlying medical condition, that they get additional doses of vaccine, or if they haven't been vaccinated, they actually do get vaccinated because they require more than 2 doses of vaccine to optimize the protection against being hospitalized and dying from COVID-19. And that is the primary focus group when it comes to vaccination, even at this stage.
In other words, the vaccines, this should be underscored, remain the best protection against the pandemic at the moment.
Absolutely, and again, to emphasize, I would really, the main focus the Department of Health should concentrate on are those people, ensuring people above the age of 65, people with underlying medical conditions, that we actually take vaccines to them. We need to have these vaccines in the clinics where people go for treatment for HIV, for cardiac problems, for lung problems. That is where the vaccines are required. So when people come to seek care, they offer vaccination when they come in to seek care, even if be it for other conditions, for other illness.
Professor Mahdi, let me thank you so much for your time and insights, as well as advice this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, Professor Mahdi, who is, of course, the Dean and Professor of Vaccinology at the University of Witwatersrand, one of the experts that have been with us on this journey since day one. Time to take a quick ad break. After the break, so many people are being touted as contestants for the ANC's top 6 positions. We asked the party's Northern Cape chairperson, Dr. Zamani Soul, of what he thinks of what he has called, quote unquote, a real congestion. That's coming up in a moment. Well, so many people are being touted as contestants for the ANC's top positions, as campaigning is gaining momentum ahead of the governing party's December elective conference. An unprecedented number of candidates looking to or being asked to fill those positions. ANC Northern Cape leader Dr. Zamani Soul calls it, quote unquote, a real congestion. He then goes on to ask, is this a sign of qualitative growth towards a deliberative democratic culture in the ANC? Well, Dr. Saul joins us on the line to answer that very question he has posed, and of course many others I'll be posing to him. Good evening, Dr. Saul. Thanks very much for your time. Tell us why you thought it was necessary to, put this out there.
No, good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to the viewership of Watchdog on SABC. I think the reality that we are confronted with is the fact that towards the 55th National Conference of the ANC that will be taking place now in December, we've got a big-time congestion. And that basically made me to start to interrogate as to whether what could be the reason for that. I think every one of us, we can just hypothecate around what could be the actual reason for that. One of the issues which I raised, as we have already mentioned, maybe that could be a sign of qualitative growth in the party, and where internal democracy of the African National Congress is gradually moving towards deliberative engagements. Deliberative engagements, I simply means critical and robust engagements around issues of leadership. So if you've got those critical and robust engagements around issues of leadership, it basically opens up for a whole lot of other people who might have not had an opportunity to contest in the past to be part and parcel of the race for leadership in the ANC. But I think we are heading towards a situation, if things stay as they are, we are heading towards a situation where we've got a record high number of contestants for all positions, right from the president up to the last position of the Treasurer General.
Well, of course, you may hold that particular view. You do know, of course, that many other people hold a different view. To them, it's a sign that the party is so seriously divided. You can't coalesce around much fewer candidates who obviously have a very real possibility of pursuing whatever program you know, that you hopefully agree on as the ANC, or you simply don't trust one another? It's a free-for-all without really much to actually justify what we are seeing.
Check, one serious responsibility of leadership, I might agree with that view, but one other responsibility of an organization, and particularly an organization which is mass-based like the African National Congress, because from the mass-based character of the organization, there comes some vulnerability. So that might happen, but when you are sitting with a mass-based organization, there should be a process of management of succession. And for all parties that have failed to manage succession, they end up being divided and end up being a high degree of instability. So the first and the foremost responsibility of building unity is to manage succession, and which I think we have to a certain extent as the movement lowered the guard, and there is no proper management of succession, and particularly from the watershed conference that we had in 2007, the contestation between JZ and Thabo Mbeki. Since that conference, you've actually seen that there's been a reduction and shedding of votes for each and every election after that conference. Because of the high level of division within the movement, because of our failure to manage succession in 2007, and we continue to suffer the adverse impact of that. But if one have to guess around what could be one of the reasons why we've got such a record high number of candidates, almost for each and every position, one of the issues is the one I've already raised, our incapacity as a party to manage succession. And the other one is the perceived weak leadership. When there is vacuum of leadership, everyone just wants to jump into and try to occupy the leadership position. Possibly linked with this perception of weak leadership is that the bar has been lowered. Everybody sees him or herself as a deputy president. It has never happened that we go to a conference and there is such a jockeying for a deputy president to an extent as if the incumbent is non-existent. So we are sitting with those challenges that we'll have to look into. But one understands why there is such a jockeying for the position of the deputy president, because the next conference is a succession conference for 2027. We are expecting that if the current incumbent president, Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa, gets elected to become the president, he will be doing his last term, and in 2027, we'll have to elect a new leader for the party, and obviously whoever emerges and win the conference as a deputy president is likely to become the president in 2027. Yes.
Perhaps before we even get to the, deputy president position, which, as you correctly point out, is in fact, most contested of the 6th position. But I don't know if you saw or read today. A few days ago, you had reports that Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma has entered or is keen to enter the race. And this morning, we now hear Dr. Zweli Mkhize is, according to at least one report, is also raising his hand, or as ANC people normally or usually put it, is not going to say no if the branches of the ANC speak. So it's getting interesting there as well, before we even get to the deputy president.
Yes, it is definitely getting interesting, and from the position of the president, but you get the intensity of jockeying around the issue around the position of the deputy president. I know for the position of the president, we roughly have about 5 candidates that have already expressed their interest. For the position of the deputy president, you roughly could count up to 8, 9, 10 that have expressed their interest.
There's actually more. I'm hoping we're going to put that to one up. But yes, continue, Dr. Sol.
Yes, but all of these names makes the engagement towards the national conference very exciting, and I firmly believe they enrich this engagement. Because the process of branch nominations is likely to start this week. I know in the province we are starting with our branch nominations. And branches are starting to ask, but from these 7 candidates for this particular position, who are they? What is it that they can bring forth? Because the reality of the matter is that 2022 National Conference now in December is intricately linked to the 2024 general elections. So we must use the forthcoming conference as a platform to unite the ANC, as a platform to launch. The reality of the matter is, as the party, we are currently confronted with an existential threat. And this existential threat, as you may know, as a political commentator, is that due to polycrisis, there's a whole lot of issues which are contributing towards the state in which we are. So this conference is not only about itself, it's also about the 2024 general elections, and I don't think we can fail in that front.
Well, interesting you're saying that, Dr. Saul, because as much as you and many other people may believe that what we're seeing coming out of the contestation around the position of Deputy President may enrich, engagements. But we also know from past experience that often you end up with compromised candidates, because from the conversations then that you begin to have ahead of and at conference, in the run-up and at conference, you then settle for less, because there's a lot of bargaining, there's a lot of trying to please everyone or to at least compromise to sort of reach particular agreements. And that, I would argue, won't help you to deal with that existential crisis ahead of and in the run-up to the next general election.
No, thank you very much. Foremost in the thinking of any ANC member, and particularly ANC leadership now, is the renewal of the organization, because we know if we don't renew the movement, we are doomed. And I firmly believe whatever compromises which might take place around issues of leadership, we are going to make it a point that those who get elected into these critical positions within the organization, where they serve as the face of the organization, they should comply to a minimum degree of ethical leadership. In their thinking and conduct, they should be guided by what we call as revolutionary morality. A revolutionary morality simply means our attitude towards governance, our attitude towards public resources. The reality of the matter is there's a strong wave of a national mood against issues of corruption, against issues of self-serving leadership, against issues of political arrogance. So whoever will emerge, in order for us to turn the tide and reverse the downward spiral and shedding of votes by the movement, we'll need to look and get candidates that will be elected into the NEC, and particularly in the top 6, that will be able to demonstratively be candidates that are committed to the renewal our movement, in order to be the agent for change in the hands of South Africans.
Well, the renewal project, of course, may well be the rallying cry, but the fact of the matter, and you know this, is that there are a lot of people who are in it for themselves, for a whole variety of reasons. So access to, or being as powerful as they can be, and being in prime positions, in a prime position of occupying certain positions, whether in government or in the ANC, that gives them not only protection but also immunity from a lot of things, including prosecutions for those who, may have been found wanting, who may have been involved in corruption or the like.
Yes, yeah, that is quite a valid point, but I want to raise it here that spoils politics, and which the politics about resources, politics of patronage, cronyism, nepotism, are a sickness of all modern political parties. And I'm certain you saw what was happening in the United Kingdom with the election of the leader there of the Conservative Party. Basically, the one who has to be elected, he has to share some spoils amongst the current serving parliamentarians there. Even so spoil politics is basically a sickness of all modern political parties. It is also a sickness for the African National Congress. But what is more important is that we should undermine this. There is no way of stopping it. We should be able to find a way of undermining it, because our overriding objective should be about putting up systems in place that would enable us to give the leadership that the country requires. That should enable us to ensure that we've got upright leadership that is driven in the main by the interest of the people that they are supposed to serve. And even within our structures as the ANC, we should be able to have leadership that stands for principle, unwaveringly stand for principle, and particularly around issues of elections.
Well, you see, remember, Dr. Solomon, there's a background to many people's, skepticism, around what, the ANC can do going forward, and whether renewal and rebuilding is actually real, or everyone takes it as seriously as some of you do. Because, look at what happened, in Polokwane. Those who moved to, for the adoption of certain resolutions were the people who then got, elected. And subsequent to their election, a lot of things happened, killing of scorpions and all those things. And today we are talking about state capture, precisely because organs of the state that would have stood between, the criminals and money and largesse would have been stopped in their tracks. But there was a deliberateness about hollowing out those institutions, destroying them, so that they could then do what they have ended up doing, which is what we're talking about now, or have to deal with as a country. So with that background, many people then tend, to say, well, what evidence is there to say that the ANC is united behind this agenda and will indeed do what they profess is what they are going to be able to do?
I think basically what has unfolded just over the past year, it's a demonstrable political capacity by the current leadership under the President Cyril Ramaphosa to really fight corruption. The budget of law enforcement institutions increased almost on a daily basis, day in, day out. So a heightened levels of activities by the law enforcement institutions, the Hawks, the SIUs, people getting arrested for corruption and all of that. So I think we should appreciate that. And I'm getting a sense that there is an increased number of South Africans who are starting to appreciate the work that we are doing, who are starting to see that there is political commitment, which is demonstrated by the work and allocation of resources to strengthen the hand of the law enforcement institutions. But the fight against corruption, and I heard one political commentator said we've got embedded corruption in South Africa. The fight against corruption, it's not an event, it is a process. It will be a prolonged process, it will be a difficult battle. And I think with the current leadership, as the President has already mentioned, there is evidence and there is proof that there is commitment to fight corruption.
Well, interestingly, it is your own comrades, some of whom, of course, want him out, who are also pointing out that he's embroiled in this whole Phala saga, and he is, refusing to come clean or to be, the kind of role model that we should be having in times like these. Keeps postponing, saying, "Oh no, we'll deal with that when there's a parliamentary process. We'll deal with that later on." When people are saying, "Why aren't you demonstrating this right now? Come clean once and for all to prove to all and sundry that you have nothing to hide."
Yes, I think that's one of the most topical issues, but I just want to give a prelude because you said a whole lot of other comrades, they basically fall victim to corruption and the work of the law enforcement agencies. Nelson Mandela once said that the ANC is not a heaven of angels, and is 100% correct. We're a mass-based organization. And people join the ANC and SARS members of the movement, they commit some indiscretions. And those who commit indiscretions, they have to be held accountable. In actual fact, that should be the responsibility of the ANC to expose them. Because at the end of the day, it becomes our individual and collective responsibility to protect the pristine and revolutionary image of the ANC. When I'm saying a revolutionary image, I simply means that the ANC can't bear an image of being a corrupt party, whilst our historical mandate is to ensure that we improve the quality of life of the poorest of the poor, the downtrodden masses in this country. The issue of Phala is also another issue which I must raise to you, and I've raised it on several occasions, that is a very unfortunate event, but one listening to the President and even with the last sitting of Parliament, he raised the issue that there's about 5 institutions which are investigating the issue of Phala, which means that already there is multiple investigations which are taking place. And he actually raises the issue that he will cooperate with all of them. And at the right time, he will speak to South Africans and take them to confidence. I think when there's such multiple investigations which are taking place, and it should just be fair, it will be fair for us to allow him to cooperate with those investigations and to ensure that he clean his name and come back, take South Africans into confidence. But we've got a clear process that we've agreed on every as the African National Congress with regard to our step-aside policy. We said it's a 3-pronged approach. If there are allegations against you, this is an internal process. If there are allegations against you, go to the Integrity Commission. We were informed and made aware of the fact that the President did go to the Integrity Commission. We're waiting for the report of the Integrity Commission based on the allegations which are made against him. But if you are charged, criminally charged, it says you must step aside. So if the President gets criminally charged, he will be required to step aside like any other member of the African National Congress. And if he gets prosecuted and gets convicted, he must step down. And that's what we'll expect from him, like any other member of the ANC.
Now, quickly, would you have dealt with this the same way if you were in President Cyril Ramaphosa's position?
It's a difficult matter, and I don't want to be presumptuous because I don't know what are the facts around the matter. And what we can accept is the fact that there are processes which are unfolding to get right into the heart of this matter so that South Africans can know what actually happened there.
The soul of the Bible, they say, among the things he was able to do was to successfully fight against the Philistines and the Ammonites and many others. He also succeeded, we are told, in drawing the tribes of Israel into a closer unity. I'm wondering what Zamani Soul's role is going to be, because there's going to be intense lobbying, and the big ANC provinces are going to slug it out and exert their influence. And what are provinces like yours, the province you are leading, how are they going to approach this matter in the next couple of months leading up to Nasrec?
I think we're in a very exciting space, because Nasrec actually rebutted the notion and the misnomer of big and small provinces. I'm certain you know that Cyril won the conference with 147 votes. And and if you look into other positions as well, the position of the Secretary General, the difference was just 24 votes. So what this actually means is that we are moving into a political milieu where the issue of small and big provinces is not applicable. What determines the impact of a province at a national conference is the intensity of the levels of unity. And for now, the Northern Cape is the most united province of the African National Congress in this country. So that gave us an advantage to engage with our sister provinces on the best way forward. And one thing that we can appreciate compared to the last conference, we've got more than 50 extra delegates. So we go to this conference with a much bigger delegation, and that would actually give us much greater space to engage with other sister provinces on what would be the best outcome for the African National Congress. But as the Northern Cape, as we have already mentioned years back, and even in our last provincial conference, is that we support the renewal agenda. We firmly believe without renewal, the movement is doomed. And we firmly believe the fact that as the African National Congress, we should reposition ourselves around issues of youth representation, around issues of women, and as well as around issues of the national question. So we have to look into that as we are going towards the national conference. We want to see significant presence of young people in this leadership. We want to see a significant presence of women in the leadership of the National Executive Committee, and particularly in the top 6. They should not occupy supporting positions of deputy this and deputy that. They should occupy substantive positions. We've never had a Secretary General who's a woman. We've never had a deputy chair, deputy president that is a woman, and those are areas that we'll have to look into.
We've never had a president who is a woman.
With the last election.
You've never had a president who is a woman. You've never had a president who is a woman.
We've never, yes, you are 100% correct. We've never had one who's a woman, but we've already expressed ourselves. The conference last year already expressed itself around the issue of the president. But what is very much important is the fact that the next conference is a succession conference to 2027. When we raise the issue of the deputy president, or we raise the issue of the SG, that is basically with an eye to 2027. So that's how these issues are interrelated and interfeeding. So that's our views as the ANC in the province. We want to see an increased number of women in that top 6 and in substantive positions and not in supporting positions.
We've seriously run out of time, but I have to ask you this. I was looking earlier at some of the responses, comments on our social media platforms. Lots of people saying, why doesn't he raise his hand? Because we believe that he can do a much better job than many, if not most, of the candidates we are seeing.
Why I don't raise my name?
Yes.
I don't raise my hand.
Your hand.
I don't think I qualify. With the challenges that the organization is confronted with, I don't think I qualify. There's cadres within the NEC, within provincial structures that stands head and shoulders above me, whom I think they can do a much better job to lead the ANC at the national level. I don't qualify for that.
Let's leave it there. Let me thank you very much for your time and for the engagement this evening, Dr. Saul.
Thank you very much for your, and thanks to the listeners.
Of course, that's the ANC's Northern Cape leader, Dr. Zamani Saul on the back, of course, of comments that he made a couple of days ago. He's saying that it's a congestion, a real congestion is what he called it. And that is the fact that we have so many people contesting at the top 6 positions in the ANC so far. That's our show for tonight. To join us again tomorrow night, same time. Have a good night.